All right, so tonight we're going to do a few different things. We want to spend a bit of time just talking about what's coming up in the next little while in the church so that you guys as leaders are on board with that and know what's happening and can then help lend weight to it. Because what we want to do is we want to all be on the same page, get that whole alignment around culture and vision going in the same direction, and you guys will be able to help us with that with the rest of the church. Because whenever we're bringing about direction and change in the church, there's always going to be people who question that, who aren't 100% sure about it. And if we can get, well, I'm getting text messages. Darren Nicholson, what are you saying? They need to mute themselves. Who needs to mute themselves?
Don't worry about it. Everyone's super quiet anyway.
Yeah, that's what I thought. All right. Yeah, I can't hear any background noise, Darren. I think everyone's quiet. Otherwise, I'll lose my train of thought too many times. So yeah, we want to get that alignment around vision. We want to be all heading in the same direction, and we need our leaders to help us with that. So that, because it's okay for people to ask questions in church life, we understand that whenever we're bringing about culture change or shifting things, which we're doing big time this year in so many areas of our church, bringing in gatherings and everything else, there's going to be questions being asked. There's going to be people who things aren't clear about, and that's okay. That's totally fine for people to ask questions. I totally get that people invest their lives into church. They invest their lives at a high level into the kingdom of God. They invest their finances into the kingdom of God, and so that, by virtue of the fact that they're invested so highly, means that they can have an opportunity to ask questions and have a say in various different levels and give opinion and so on. So we certainly aren't a dictatorship. We don't want to control people. That's not what we're about. But we are about understanding the need for alignment around vision and direction, so that we can have maximum effectiveness for the kingdom of God. And you guys have heard me say it ad nauseum, but the more I learn about leadership, the more I learn that you need to keep saying things, even to the point where you think you're bored of it. Is when it started to sink in that we're not going to try and be every church. We're not going to try and do everything or satisfy everybody's needs. We have to be who we're called to be. There's many different facets of the kingdom of God. God is multifaceted himself, and he's into all different colours and styles and all sorts of stuff. And so that's good. That's a wonderful thing. And so it frees us up to be the kind of church we're called to be. And first and foremost, that's a C3 church. So we need to do everything we do in the church through the lens of the main filter of who we are as C3, the visionary leadership of our movement, because the biblical principle behind that is that God's blessing flows down upon an authority structure. So if we, as a church, step out from underneath that authority structure, we're putting ourselves outside the protection zone that God has set up, and we open ourselves and our people up to all kinds of things that aren't being protected because we're not under that covering. And so we're a C3 church. We honour our leaders, Phil and Chris. We want to uphold and do our part to fulfil that vision. The good thing about C3 is there is lots of space for us to have different flavours and different expressions even within that. It's not so rigid that we all have to have the same format or the same structure in the way we do church or the same liturgy, if you like. We can express ourselves very freely within that framework. And I like to think of that as not like a line that we have to walk along. When it comes to this alignment issue in culture and direction in church life, don't think of it like a line where you can't step off one side or the other. I like to think of it more like a paddock with a fence around it. And our visionary leaders, whenever it comes to vision, whether it's our vision from our apostolic leadership, Phil and Chris Pringle, or from John and Daniel Pierce within Australia, or even within our local authority structures, if we think of it like a fence that's the boundary around the outside, and we are free to roam in that boundary and express ourselves within the confines of that boundary, that's a far better way to view submission to authority than this dictatorial thing that says you must do it this way. And that's to say there is space for lots of different expressions, and I'm glad about that. We express ourselves differently in Australian C3 churches to how the African churches express themselves. They're still dancing with their flags and they're full coloured and African dances, and it's wonderful. But it wouldn't work in Australian culture, but it works works fantastically in the African culture, and so there's space for that within C3 as long as we uphold some of these core cultural values. And so I wanted to spend a few moments and just kind of revise some of that stuff. Wallandilly people, we spent a lot of time last year doing culture and talking about it. Did a whole series for a couple of months, as you know, and we didn't do that in as much depth at Camden, but we have certainly touched on it at Camden too. And we're going to continue to talk culture. We're going to continue to talk vision and mission. And you may think, oh, when's he going to change on this point? Well, he's not, because we're going to continue to reinforce our culture in all different ways and avenues, because it's culture that will help us to stay in alignment and achieve what God has for us. Culture in any organisation, whether it's a family or a business, place of education or a church, is what makes an organisation work. And so we want to continue to focus on that. And for that, with that, Beck told me she was interrupting me. Now Beck's saying that Erin still dances with flags. Yes, this is true, Erin. You could probably put your camera on and give us one of those dances in a minute if you want to. But we want to continue to reinforce culture. We want to continue to press forward with these things and have you guys help us with that. So that booklet that Kim put together that we've handed out to lots of people, we're going to be giving that to every new person that comes to our church, that shows our vision and our mission, what we're about, our vision and our mission, what we're about as a church, how we do what we do. And so we're going to continue to be very upfront about that so that people understand from the beginning. So our vision statement to be Christ-centered, Spirit-empowered, connect-driven, culturally relevant. And so these have implications for our church. What does it mean to be Christ-centered? Well, it means that we make sure that we keep Jesus central to everything we do and everything we say. To be Spirit-empowered means that we create space continually for the Holy Spirit to work. And that might mean that for some people that might be a little bit uncomfortable, because when the Holy Spirit moves, he can be a bit uncomfortable. If we want to keep everything in a box and assume that everything's perfect, then when we can find ourselves cramming out the Holy Spirit, because he's a little bit strange at times. He does things in strange ways. He's supernatural by virtue of who he is, and so he will do supernatural things. And so at one end of the spectrum, you can have people who struggle with that, who think maybe come from a more traditional background and struggle with Holy Spirit stuff and might really find that a bit uncomfortable. And I would say if you've come from that background, I would encourage you to open up your heart a little bit more than you have been and just go, well, okay, I'm open to the fact that the Holy Spirit can do some strange stuff sometimes. Jesus did some strange stuff when he healed people. Yeah, it wasn't as weird and out there as some of those mythological stuff that I was preaching about Sunday before last, but still he's a bit different. He spits and makes mud and puts it in people's eyes and heals them, and that's pretty weird. But that's the way Jesus worked. So be open to that. Just read the book of Ezekiel and you'll realize how weird God can be at times. But the opposite side of that is that if you're more attuned or more accustomed to maybe the Pentecostal end of the spectrum, and that's the background you've come from, maybe you guys might have a challenge as well, in the sense that we need to be prepared to pare ourselves back a little bit, because some of our stuff that we do is not culturally relevant, so it flies in the face of cultural relevance. And so these two, Spirit-empowered and culturally relevant, can actually potentially clash with each other a little bit. And so it's important that we recognise that and allow for a bit of tension, a little bit of difference at times. That's okay. We're going to get that. We're going to get some tension, but let's just all show grace towards one another. Being culturally relevant is important, and creating space for people to grow in their faith, people to be able to be vulnerable is important as we work on our culture. So I'm going to keep talking about culture moving forward. We've got some feedback from someone there.
It's okay. It's only Graham.
It's Graham, is it? Are you on your phone, Graham, or you...
I eventually unmuted it just then. That's why it's come through. I've got unmuted now.
Oh, you're unmuted now.
Yes.
Okay, so if you... There you go. So if you mute yourself... Have you got two phones running in the room or just the one?
I'll just turn Carol's off.
Yeah, that's what the feedback was. You got two running at the same time in the same room. Right.
All
So
good. Thank you.
all good. So if you mute yourself now, you can come back on if you need to say something. That's just a reminder too. There'll be plenty of time for some interaction before we finish tonight, guys. But if you wanted to say something, you can just jump on board with questions when the time comes. So the other thing that's in the guiding principle booklet, and if you haven't got a copy, we've got plenty of them. We're getting plenty of them, and we've got enough for vision builders, but we're getting some more. Is that you guys can keep a copy of that, is all those guiding principles. And I want to just keep reminding you of the guiding principles. And I wanted to just kind of address, by way of introduction tonight, and remind us about that guiding principle. That's my phone. That guiding principle of accountability, about being willing to learn and grow and be and develop in your faith, I suppose, and have someone speak into your life. It's not always an easy thing to have people who challenge you on stuff, but we're going to continue to talk to that, because that's how we'll grow. It's not just about us growing as a church and for achieving our mission. That's important, but it's also about each of us ourselves growing, being committed to growth personally, in God spiritually, and in our leadership and our influence of other people. And so that's going to help us to do that if we can be continually open to that. So I'm going to keep reminding you, who have you got in your world who you're giving permission to speak into your life? Who have you got that you can sit down with? You can say, hey, can we have a coffee? And you actually ask them, okay, how am I tracking? How is my spiritual life going? This is how I think I am, but how do you think I am? And be welcoming and inviting of that from leaders in your world, from your pastors, from people who you respect, who are along in the journey spiritually. Every one of us needs that, and I can't stress that enough, because we all have blind spots, and the worst thing about blind spots is we can't see them. None of us can see our own blind spots. That's why they're called blind spots. And so if we don't have someone who we trust to speak into our life, we can drive through life completely unaware that we've even got these blind spots, and they're affecting our growth, they're affecting our relationships, they may be affecting our spiritual health. And so we want to make sure that every one of us, it's a guiding principle in our life, that every one of us, there are people in our world that can speak to us straight. And it's open and it's invited. That will help us move all together in the one direction, which is good for us, but ultimately we can't really do anything less, because we need to be up for it, because the kingdom depends upon us growing. Jesus has entrusted his kingdom to his people, to his church, and he hasn't got a plan B. We're it. Plan A is it, and therefore we have tremendous responsibility to be focused on our growth and development. And if you struggle with that a bit, and you feel like you struggle when people talk to you straight, maybe take a read of the Gospels through a different lens. Because we spend a lot of time focusing on Jesus' ministry and caring for the poor and reaching out for the underdog and lifting up and forgiveness and all of that stuff. And it's wonderful, and we should focus on that aspect of Jesus' ministry. But I think sometimes we skip over some of the more challenging stuff that Jesus says. And I'm not just talking about to the Pharisees. I think most of us would know that he was pretty challenging with the Pharisees and the self-righteous people. But really, he spoke pretty straight to his disciples at times. And if you read the gospel through that lens and you look at the kind of call of directional stuff that he gave to his disciples at times, it wasn't soft and gentle and always warm and caressing. He spoke pretty strongly to them and called them to account in certain areas, and had a very high demand of what he expected of them, and was frequently disappointed and expressed that disappointment when they didn't live up to it. Not that we understand grace. It's not that level of growth and works was necessary for salvation, but that doesn't mean that we're not challenged or expected to continue to grow. And we need people in our world to help us do that. And so that's why I want to call you to that. I want you to be thinking about it. Come out of tonight's meeting with thinking, okay, who have I got who is speaking to me? And some of you, I know that you're open to that. I was really encouraged. Ali Gebhardt, I saw your comment to Edwina on Facebook the other day to Edwina. That one just comes to mind about how you honoured Edwina for speaking into your life and living an example to you, and that's good. That's what we're talking about. Someone who you can speak into your world and say, hey, I'm open, I'm up for this. And I think we all need to have that in our world. All right, I'm going to come back to some other stuff to do with personal development before we finish, but let's do some update stuff. I haven't asked Ivana yet, but I asked Edwina today. Just maybe we just get a bit of an update on the gatherings from our gatherings pastors, from Edwina and Ivana, on how they're going. So, Edwina, do you want to log your camera on, and maybe you can start and just give us an update on how, maybe some highlights of how the gatherings have been going?
Sure. They've been going really well. We've had really good, quite good attendance. We've had three weeks. Some people have had 4 gatherings already. So we've been really encouraged by the people who even weren't involved in Connect groups before, who are really enjoying the gathering model. And it seems like people are really excited about where they could go, and are seeing that. I think a common comment that people are saying is that when they've been to one, they say, I could see my friends being here. I could see me bringing family. Or I could see me bringing the people out of my world into this. So I think that people have needed a couple of weeks to feel safe in that and to feel comfortable in that. But we've definitely had across our gatherings, especially in this last week, people inviting people from outside the church in. And we've had some people coming along.
Good.
And some feedback about some good and interesting conversation and some hard questions, and which I think is all really great. That's exactly what we wanted in that. So I've been really encouraged by people's willingness to just jump on board with the vision and give it a go. And even though some groups are bursting at the seams, like we had it was almost like an extension service in our house the other night. We had 31 people for dinner.
31 people.
So I wasn't quite sure where they were all going to sit, but it worked, and it was a really good night of just discussion and fellowship, and so I've been really encouraged by that and looking forward. There's been a few teething issues in bits and pieces, and I've been really thankful for people's feedback on that and their grace and patience in that as well.
Yeah.
From for those of you who've been giving feedback, it's been really appreciated. And excited to see, especially next term. I think people are really seeing that now they know what it looks like. Now they know how they run. They're really keen to launch into next term by inviting people along. Especially off the back of Easter, and hopefully inviting them to church in that time as well. So I think it's been going really well. We could do with a few more leaders. That's something to pray about, because there's a few that are bursting at the seams already.
Yeah.
And but that'll come, and I think people really seeing how it works and seeing the vision. I think people will really jump on board with saying, hey, maybe I can give this a go, being a leader in this. So I've been really encouraged.
Great, good job. Well, Ivana, I'll get you to comment for Wallandilly in a moment, but just back of what Edwina's just said there, just to lend weight to that, because there are some groups that are bursting at the seams, some not so much, but some are quite big already. 31 might take the record, I think. I think the Sidles had 20-something, but 31 is probably the record. Just from that perspective, what Edwina said, yes, we could do with more leaders, and initially, just so you all know, we originally were planning on having more leaders. We invited more leaders. We were intending to have a few more groups. But what we found was that when we actually set that standard for leadership, and we said these are the certain requirements that we're asking people to live up to for leadership, there were a few people who, and you heard me say it, they had permission not to. There were a few people who said, this isn't for me right now. And that's totally cool. I wanted that. I wanted people to feel safe to be able to say no if they didn't feel it was for them, and not to feel as though somehow that makes them second class, or somehow that's it, they've shot themselves in the foot and there's no chance for the future. And I think sometimes people were just maybe wanting to test the waters a bit and see how it would work. And so that's okay. And we really felt, and I remember talking to our leaders about this and saying, look, I would rather have less leaders who are with us totally, 100% on board in all areas of church life, whether that's gatherings or in departments or in our board or anywhere else, rather have less leaders who are 100% committed and with us than to have more people who are just sort of half-hearted in that, because that's ultimately going to help us to get that momentum going, to get that flywheel spinning. It takes work to get a flywheel spinning, and if you've got people who aren't really 100% committed, then that's going to cause more of a problem moving forward, and it will actually ultimately slow us down more than to have less people who are committed. And you guys who are on, and you guys who are here, you're up for this. You're committed to this, and you're up for growth, and you're committing to it. And it's not, like Edwina said, it's not always easy. It's not easy to have that many people in your home. It's not easy to facilitate much discussion with that many people. All those things are challenging, but together we're pressing forward. And if we determine to show each other grace and understand that as pastors we're going to scratch our heads sometimes. We haven't got all the answers to all the problems. It's nice to take a magic wand and wave it and fix everybody's problem, but we can't. And we're figuring things out, and we're going to make mistakes as we go. But if we can continue to show grace to each other, then I think we'll have more and more leaders who will come on board and will say, hey, I can do this. And ultimately it's going to push us forward more in the direction we're after. So, Ivana, are you there? Can you give us a report on Wallandilly?
Sure. Same as Edwina, pretty much.
You can flick your camera on if you want to.
Encouraged by the leaders that have stepped up and have said yes. And we've been running for a few weeks, and a highlight also has been that new families and new people are joining every week at church. As we talked about it in the fellowship time, even on Sunday, we had a family say, "Oh, we'd really love to go. Can we, get connected with one of the gathering groups?" And so that was really exciting. Just, every week new people are asking more and more about it, because people are sharing about how good it was when they got together. And yes, for sure, some houses were filled to capacity, but that also shows the need, that we've got, that we want to keep multiplying, and we want to keep growing, we want to keep reaching out. So I'm quite happy for that to happen, even for the next few weeks, for homes to feel that way, because then I think people are going to step forward and begin to say, I could possibly open my home or my world to that, to lead a discussion, and then we'll keep seeing growth. But definitely, I had one person say to me on Sunday they love the church because the sense of community, and I asked them, well, how are we showing you that? And they said, not only with what's happening on a Sunday, but the things that you guys now are doing with your gathering groups. That's a real community where I can start to get to know people. I can settle into this church. They're only a new family in our church. So that's, it's really exciting. Yeah.
That's been one of our highlights at Wallandilly. We've had all these new families join, and they've pretty much gone straight to gatherings, haven't they?
They sure have, yeah. It's been awesome for that, yeah. Yeah,
so that's a good sign. People come on a Sunday and then they've got that avenue to get connected during the week, and the flip side can happen too. People can join the church via going to a gathering first. So it's really positive. I think we just keep reinforcing that, speaking positively about it. You guys speak positively. You will get feedback. People might say, oh, it's all been done before, or we're not doing enough Bible study, or you're going to hear all those things, right? But just keep reinforcing for us as leaders. Just keep saying the same thing. I'm a Bible teacher, so you can say, well, Pastor Rowan, he loves the Word of God too. But, we're looking at other avenues for that. Really, our primary focus around our gatherings is creating environments for unchurched people to build connection with Jesus and His church. And you don't need to be in-depth Bible study to do that. That can be done at a level that's centered around life discussion, and it can be relevant for mature Christians as well as for people who are just seeking and looking, who don't even have a relationship with Jesus yet. And the more we say that and speak up to that, the more we will bring alignment around that issue. And that's the direction we're going. It may not always be that way. There could come a day when God tells us, right, shut down your gatherings and run Bible school. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't see that happening in the short amount of time, but anything's possible in the future. But right now, that's what we're doing. And so let's just, as a church and as leaders, keep speaking up the vision. Doesn't always mean you'll agree with everything. That's okay. But we still speak up about positively around our vision moving forward. That's going to help us. So Ivana and Edwina, do you have any rough ideas on what percentage of our congregation may have been attending? Like, just give us ballpark. Would it be 50%, 60%? We could probably find that out, but just out of interest for everyone, what sort of percentage are we looking at, do you think?
Are you going to go, Ivana? Or like,
Go for it.
I would say, I reckon probably about 60%
Mm-hmm.
of Camden is probably connected to a gathering.
Yep.
Some haven't been too frequent in their attendance, but say they're connected to a gathering.
Yep.
But I would say that would be my guess without having looked at it.
Looking at it. Yep. What would you say, Ivana?
I'd probably say about 40%.
Okay.
But attendance has been good.
Yeah, so about
And
40% people are going.
Yeah, each week almost we're getting another new person or another new family coming into a gathering.
Good.
So that's growing. It's definitely growing each week.
And that's 1 week behind what Camden as well, because Wallandilly started a week later, so it's one less meeting as well, which is good. The reason I asked that question is just to give some clarity to you guys. Normally, statistically, for everyone to know this, attendance at small groups in churches like Australian average, if you're running at 60%, you're way above average. They say about 50% of your congregation, if they are attached or recognised as being a part of some kind of small group, that's about right. Okay, so for Wallandilly, if we're running somewhere between 40 and 50, and we can find out the stats, that's not bad. We didn't run connect groups at all last year, so that's not a bad stat. If we're running at 60%, we're already above the average. It's more about consistency. Often when you start groups, when we started the small groups for What on Earth Am I Here For, those Rick Warren stuff, beginning of the year before last, we had high attendance and then it petered off. So it's about keeping the attendance going, and that's where you guys who are gathering leaders need to keep the momentum. That's your big part of your role, especially the hosting home team people. Keep inviting people. Don't stop inviting people, texting them saying, hey, we're looking forward to seeing you at gathering this week. Make use of Facebook groups and make sure you invite people. Set up a Facebook group if you haven't for your own gathering group, and set up events on there and just keep communication happening, because that's what will stop attendance from petering off. We want to keep people engaged in gatherings because so much of their spiritual growth will take place. And so you guys can help with that just through constantly speaking it up and reminding people. And especially as you get into like week 7 and 8 at the end of the term, you're ready for a break, I get that, and can feel like, oh, I just don't want to go through the hassle of having so many people in my house tonight or whatever. Just stay the course for us. That's going to help us grow our church more than probably anything else we're doing at the moment this year is our gatherings. All right, I wanted to just let you know about Easter weekend. I'm assuming it was announced yesterday. Thanks to everyone that held the fort yesterday as well while Jill and I were away on holidays. Had some good reports back about the worship and the speakers as well. People commenting on those 4 of you that talked, Louise and Karen at Wallandilly and Patricia and Jimmy at Camden. Thanks, guys. Looking forward to hearing those messages as well. So as we head into Easter weekend, we're going to run, for the first time, we're going to run 2 separate Good Friday services, one at each location, one at 9:30 and one at 10, 9:30 at Wallandilly and 10 at Camden. We've not done a separate campus, separate location Good Friday service before, but we're in a position where we've got enough musos. That's nearly always the main issue. So thanks to all our musos that are stepping up for that. And I know that's going to be great, just a 1 hour service. And Edwina is going to do a devotion kind of message at Camden, and Pastor Terry is going to do similar sort of thing at Wallandilly. It's always great when Pastor Terry speaks, always full of life. So we're looking forward to those Good Friday services. We'll do communion on Good Friday as well. And then on Easter Sunday, we will run our normal services, and I'm going to just continue a little bit, albeit shortened version and a bit more outreach focus for Easter Sunday. But I'm going to talk about the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, seeing as it's Resurrection Sunday, and that will fit with the theme we're doing about the ongoing theme we're doing about resurrection and about the evidence for Jesus. So while we're on that, just for the next 2 minutes, I would love to get some feedback from anybody at all that has any feedback on the current series about the evidence for Jesus. If you've got any sort of positive feedback or even some constructive stuff that you think could benefit us moving forward as we adjust these Reasons to Believe series and fine-tune them, love to hear from you. Just unmute yourself and even put your camera on if you want to, and just give us some feedback on anything you've personally thought yourself or heard from other people.
Oh,
Good.
it's Chris.
It's Chris. Hi,
Hey,
Chris.
hello. On delay. Yeah, look, I've been loving it. I think it's been very. I'm a bit of a history buff. I'm a bit of a numbers buff, so I've really loved the whole historical context of the whole evidence of Jesus. I found it really, even entertaining. I've loved everything about it. But then again, I'm a massive nerd. So keep going with that. I love the feedback we've heard, and we've spoken to a few people in our gatherings, and they've really got a lot out of it. From what I've heard anyway. So yeah, it all seems to be going pretty well. So yay.
Good. Thanks, Chris. It's encouraging. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll say something, Ron.
Yeah.
The new couple we had on Sunday.
Was this a couple that I haven't met yet, or?
Yeah, I think you've met. Did you not meet Deb and James?
I wasn't there on Sunday.
They just came for the first time.
Oh, okay.
Deb's been before. But they really enjoyed it. James said that he's going to come back. So they've been out of church for quite a while. They made the move to come back into church, and they're saying, yeah, they think they really love the series. They love what they heard on Sunday.
Great. Maybe the pastor should stay away more often. That's great.
Edwina says no.
How did you go, Edwina? You would have aced it. You would have been fine without us there.
No, it was really good. Ginny and Patricia did really well on Sunday. I think it was a little bit of the same feedback as what I'm hearing in the gatherings, is that I think people are feeling really safe to invite people to church. And I think that, when people are asked to invite people from their world into church, there's always a bit of I don't know, I think people can feel uneasy because they're never sure week to week what they're inviting people into.
Yeah.
And I think that there's been, a real safety that's been built in this series, that no matter what week they invite their friends to, that their friends are going to be included in everything that we do, and that they're going to get something out of that. So I've been encouraged by that feedback.
Oh, that's really good feedback. That's great. I think that's part of this advanced planning we have, guys, to have our series well promoted. So on Sunday, you guys would have got the invite cards for Easter services, but we didn't put out any invitation cards for our March services just because we were out of time. But the intention is that we'll have invite cards. Kim's going to work on invite cards for all our future services as well, so that we can promote in advance. And so, like, we set up I recorded a short video on Facebook, and some of you would have seen that. We promoted that. It cost us about $100, $120 or something to promote that video across both our locations. And across the two locations, we've had like 7,000 people view it or something like that. So across the area. So, you can make use of social media and advertising. And like Edwina said, the idea of this series is that we can not just answer our own questions, but we can create a series where you can invite people to be a part of it, and that they can feel safe inviting their friends. That's our whole intention. So keep doing that. Keep encouraging your teams and your people in your gathering. Even in gatherings, it's good to say to them, who are you inviting along to gathering next week? Who are you inviting to church? Just keep it in front of them. You guys as leaders can lead the way, not just in invitation yourself, but reminding people of that. So that's good feedback. Time for one more comment. If someone wants to make a comment about current series, how it's encouraged them, or not so much?
Yeah, I like to say something. There's so many critics out there, isn't there? And even questioning the validity of the Bible. So I think it's good to have people to go to the church and and you know, with what you're doing, and you know, the evidence of Christ, and you know, is the Bible real, and you know, backing up with archaeological history and all that kind of stuff, and rather than having a standard normal service, you know, I think it's good that we're sort of, you know, reaching out for these, you know, these people that are, you know, questioning Christianity.
Yeah, it's good. And your feeling is that, because you do speak to a lot of people who are in that category, don't you, Steve? You will talk to a lot of people who are seeking, I suppose, are seekers.
Yeah, the seekers, you know, they have their, you know, they want facts. Well, I think some people don't even want facts. They just sort of believe, I don't know, what is it, that postmodern kind of thinking, isn't it, where everyone has their own kind of truth, you know, and, you know, if Christianity is based on absolute truths, you know, then, you know, I guess we need a good reason for why we have this absolute truth, don't we? Yeah.
So being able to have the tools for you to use to engage people in conversation is a good thing, you think?
Yeah, what is it? Apologetics, is that what it is?
Apologetics, yes.
It's even generated discussion at home.
Yeah, it's generated discussions here at home too,
Great.
you know, in our family, which is good.
That's really good, yeah. Yep, apologetics, being able to have that conversation, that's wonderful.
Yeah, so...
the interest in the gatherings, like...
Yeah, the interest in the gatherings here, you know, just like having Brian here, he's good value, and I think Anne Marie would back up on that one too. He's a laugh, that bloke.
Yeah.
But it's been fantastic.
Oh, you guys are doing great with the gatherings. That's fantastic.
We have about 10, but we limit it to 10. You know, we have about 80 people, but we have a sign out the gate saying limit of 10 people. So we rotate the 80 people over 10 weeks.
They just line up out the front, do they? Yeah. I know you're joking. You guys have got 2 less weeks anyway, because you're going to be.
Yes.
You guys are going to be away with this. Well, that's next term, isn't it? That'll be next term in your gatherings. All 4 gathering leaders are going to be with me in Israel, so that'll be it. That gathering will be shut down for a few weeks. All right, so that's great. All right, anyone else want to add a comment? I want to do a little bit of, I guess, leadership teaching before we close, and I want to make sure we finish by 8:30, like I said. So, any other comments that you need to make? Itchy to make, anybody? Rod says, I think having the 3 weeks on the same thing has been good to consolidate the message and the theme. Great. That's good feedback. We're going to be aiming to do that, 3 weeks to a month on a theme. Thanks, Rod. Elle says, the first week I was able to be there, I left church with such a sense of relief in the fact that I felt like I had more proof than many other people have for their beliefs. Thanks, Elle. That's really good. Tuve says, great service at Camden yesterday. Han says, preach. Tuve says, the worship block was so good. Well, I heard great things about Wallandilly's worship as well, so that's great. Oh, this is Mike, not Han. Okay, all good. So some good feedback there. I heard that the worship was good. Steve, you said I saw your comment on Facebook, you feel like the worship team gelled really well and some good stuff there for Wallandilly worship team, good future stuff.
Yeah. You know, it's growing, isn't it? You know, like we've sort of, it's I guess churches are always in a state of flux, aren't they? Yeah. And you know, I thought the music was really good. And we had the heart for it, you know, in spirit, so it's great.
Yeah, that's great. All right, fantastic. Okay, what I want to do, guys, is I want to draw your attention to, I might even see if I can set my whiteboard up. Let me see if I can do that. I wanted to just do a little bit of leadership stuff with you for the next few minutes. See if we can get this to work. Yes, I carry a whiteboard in my home office all the time. And I don't know what's on the other side, but I'll use the back of it for a minute. I wanted to just pull some stuff out of one of the many leadership books that I've read this year. I've read a number of books by an author, a Christian author by the name of Patrick Lencioni. And he is a Christian author who writes in the business sector for leadership. And he has a number of New York Times best-selling books. covering all kinds of issues, and he writes for leadership in churches and business and all sorts of stuff. And what I particularly like about the way he writes these books is that nearly all of them are written as a fable. He actually writes a fiction story, so it's unlike most non-fiction books, which is just stating fact. He actually is a very good storyteller, so he builds characters, and he spends about 2/3, 3/4 of the book writing a story. You're actually reading a fiction story, and in that he unpacks all the principles around the different aspects of leadership, and then he spends the last quarter of the book all that teaching on the principles and referring back to what he did in the book. And so I would recommend these books. Patrick Lencioni, that's Lencioni, Patrick Lencioni, and any of his stuff. I've read nearly all of it now, and it's all brilliant. Some of the best leadership stuff I've read. And I want to pull some stuff tonight out of one of his books called The Ideal Team Player. Kim, I know you have already read this book because you told me. What was the name again? Patrick Lencioni. Darren, Patrick Lencioni. Lencioni. Patrick Lencioni. And The Ideal Team Player is one of his books, one of his fictional, he calls them leadership parables, I think. And he talks about, in this book, about 3 virtues that are necessary in order for a person to be an ideal team player, to be most effective, and work as part of a team, in which case, really, we all are. These principles apply to a person working in the sporting world, the business world, the family world, church world, and so on. And so he defines 3 virtues that I'm going to see if I can put it on the board where you can see it. Well, that fan's not going to work. It's going to be a problem. But what have we got here? That's a permanent marker. I don't know if this is going to work. We'll see. You probably won't be able to read that. No, that's okay. Probably be backwards for you. Is it backwards? It's backwards for me. I can't write backwards though. He has 3 virtues: humble, hungry, and smart. And he explains these 3 characteristics, or these 3 virtues, as virtues that when we get them in a good mix, when we get a good mix of all 3 of these, we will be what he defines as an ideal team player. And I want to read you some of the stuff that he's got in his notes here. And I'm going to, once I record all this, I'll be putting it all, the webinar, the recording of the webinar, up on our trained up page, so you'll be able to view it and go back and read it anyway. Go back and look at the video. So he says, in the context of teamwork, humility is largely what it seems to be. Great team players lack excessive ego or concerns about status. They're quick to point out the contributions of others and slow to seek attention for their own. They share credit, emphasize team over self, and define success collectively rather than individually. It's no great surprise then that humility is the single greatest and most indispensable attribute of being a team player. And then he goes on and says, there are 2 basic types of people who lack humility, and it's important, even critical, to understand them because they look quite different from one another and they impact a team differently. The most obvious kind is the overtly arrogant people who make everything about them. They're easy to identify because they tend to boast and soak up attention. This is classic ego-driven type, and it diminishes teamwork by fostering resentment, division, and politics. Most of us have seen plenty of this work in our behaviour in our careers. The next type is less dangerous, but still worth understanding. These are people who lack self-confidence, but are generous and positive with others. They tend to discount their own talents and contributions, and so others mistakenly see them as humble. But this is not true humility. While they are certainly not arrogant, their lack of understanding of their own worth is also a violation of true humility. Truly humble people do not see themselves as greater than they are, but neither do they discount their talents and contributions. C.S. Lewis addressed this misunderstanding about humility when he famously said, humility isn't thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And so this whole second characteristic is actually, it can come across as humility, but it's actually rooted in pride as well, because it's this lack of self-belief or self-worth. And all pride ultimately is rooted in, is humility, or pride is rooted in insecurity and not being comfortable with who we are. And so both of those can be dangerous. I know for me, from my own personal walk and in my own and my feedback I've had from other people, that second category is a big one for me. I don't always, at times in my life struggled to be comfortable in my own skin, and so that's how it'll come across sometimes. It'll come across as though I don't push myself forward enough, I'm not confident enough, and so you might be able to identify with one of those characteristics. So that's humility and the importance of understanding humility. The next one is hungry. And he describes hungry people as the people who are always looking for more things to do, more to learn, more responsibility to take on. Hungry people almost never have to be pushed by a manager to work hard because they're self-motivated and diligent. They're constantly thinking about the next step and the next opportunity, and they loathe the idea that they might be perceived as slackers. It's not difficult to understand why hungry people are great to have on a team, but it's important to realize that some types of hunger are not good for the team and are even unhealthy. In some people, hunger can be directed in a selfish way that is not good for the team, but is not for the good of the team or for the individual. And in some people, hunger can be taken to an extreme where work becomes too important, consuming the identity of an employee and dominating their life. When I refer to hunger here, I'm thinking about a healthy kind, a manageable and sustainable commitment to doing a job well and going above and beyond when it is truly required. And that's really good. Steve and Vicky say no one wants a narcissistic leader. That's true. And narcissism is nasty. It really is. I always say nasty narcissism. If you have that mentality of being dominating and all that kind of stuff, it really is nasty. And so a hungry person is a person who's committed to going the extra mile, committed to doing what it takes. So if we head into Easter time, we go, hey, this is a highlight time for our church. You know, this is an opportunity to reach new people and reach friends. So we're going to lift our game a little bit. We're going to go a little bit further. We're going to go over and above, not to the point where we burn ourselves out, not to the point where we prioritize our work or our ministry over all other areas of our life. I heard Jill and I often talk about the fact that we heard Pastor Gordon Moore and Joe Moore from C3 Bridgman Downs, who now handed their church on. They're now in the global exec. They said to us years ago, it's often stuck with us, don't sacrifice your family on the altar of ministry. And so we've often referred back to that. We're not talking about being so hungry that we lose out with our family and other things, but just a healthy amount of hunger. So humble people, hungry people, and smart people. Now, smart is not about intelligence here. He uses the term smart. I'm going to read to you what it really means, but he's really talking about it. The closest definition would be emotional intelligence, people smarts, if you like, understanding how to read people and so on. So here's what he has to say about smart people. In the context of a team, smart simply refers to a person's common sense about people. It has everything to do with the ability to be interpersonally appropriate and aware. Smart people tend to know what is happening in a group situation and how to deal with others in the most effective way. They ask good questions. They ask good questions, listen to what others are saying, and stay engaged in conversations intently. Some might refer to this as emotional intelligence, which wouldn't be a bad comparison, but smart people is probably a little simpler than that, even that. Smart people just have a good judgment and intuition around the subtleties of group dynamics and the impact of their words and actions on others. As a result, they don't say and do things or fail to say and do things without knowing the likely responses of their colleagues. Keep in mind that being smart doesn't necessarily imply good intentions. There's a good point here. Smart people can use their talents for good or ill purposes. In fact, some of the most dangerous people in history have been noted for being interpersonally smart. I've been doing some historical fiction while I've been on holidays, reading some the last couple of weeks, and so I was reading quite extensively about Adolf Hitler in the context of the Jews. And there's a man who was incredibly interpersonal smart and used his charisma and his charm and understood people, but he used it for destructive purposes. So the key is not that these three alone, standing alone, are going to be helpful. Patrick Lencioni's main premise is that the three together, when you have a healthy balance of each of these, is going to be good. Steve's going to write us a song, and he's just got his guitar out, so he's obviously going to turn it into a song for us as we go. So having a healthy balance of humble, hungry, and smart. Any comments on those three before I show you in the next few minutes how they interact with each other? Any thoughts on humble, hungry, and smart? You can type it or dictate, whatever you prefer. Kim, you read the book, didn't you? You got anything to add?
Well, make a comment.
What's that? Throwing you in the deep end. Kim, go for it.
Hang on.
While you're waiting, Darren and Claire say EQ can be learned, which is good. Do you want to jump on and elaborate a bit on what you mean by that, Darren? You've spent a lot of time dealing with this at work. Why don't you give the guys a couple of thoughts?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
So, I've been studying this stuff a lot over the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years maybe, and your personality and, who you are, that sort of stuff gets locked in when you're, fairly young, between 7, 10, 11 sort of years old. But your EQ, your emotional intelligence, is the one thing that you can improve on. Your IQs are also locked down pretty tight. It's very hard to increase your IQ. But your EQ, you can study, you can learn, you can practice, you can train yourself and become better and better at it as you go on. And I think your word there, smart, is that smart people know that they're learning and growing as time goes on with regards to their EQ.
Good, and there's room to grow. So would it be fair to say that EQ grows best in the culture of accountability?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Where you're held accountable for your actions and you're being coached in it. It's not something that we can necessarily grow in without having someone coach us, is it? It's easy. It's certainly easier if you have someone to coach you in it.
Yeah, that's right. And you need to be able to take feedback and listen and then process the feedback so that you can learn from it and grow. Good.
Lyndon's got a comment. It's great to hear about 2 extremes of humility. Often the quieter one can go unseen. Absolutely. Yeah, and because it can go unseen, it can not always be healthy too. So it's about becoming more comfortable in our own skin. So for me, Lyndon, that's been part of my own lesson, is learning to be comfortable in my own skin. I tend to be all right while I'm a big fish in a small pond, but if I'm a small fish in a big pond, I'm not comfortable. And so I've had to learn to put myself out there and back my judgment a bit more and understand that people actually have good intentions. And so if you do fall on your face because you feel like you don't have the right words to say at the right time, that's okay. Most people are gracious with us anyway. And so that's a big part of my learning game, is learning to be a bit more comfortable with myself. Otherwise, really, it's still rooted in pride. So, good point. All right, I want to just take these 3, humble, hungry, smart, and before we finish, I want to just show you an interaction between the 3 that Patrick Lencioni does and how they interact. And he says he does it through a couple of diagrams where they interact with each other. I know there's a bit of a glare up the top there, but we'll see how we go. So he says if you only have one of these virtues in your world as a major strength, it's going to lead to a couple of different things. So he says he calls the person who is only humble, he calls them the pawn. He calls the person who is only hungry the bulldozer. And the person who is only smart, he calls the charmer. And already, if you've got any kind of nous about you, you'll see that those make a lot of sense. And so he does stress that, all of us will struggle to some degree with one of these areas. None of us are going to be always the ideal perfect team player who fits in the middle, but we'll always have a tendency to be going in some of these areas. But the humble person, he says, we haven't got time to look at those, but the pawn is the person who really does just let everyone walk over them. And they may be gracious, but they obviously aren't always a good team player because they don't put themselves forward enough. They're not comfortable enough to often put out their opinion there. And so they might be a good worker, but we're missing out on their best because they're not bringing their best to the table in terms of their confidence. The bulldozer is pretty obvious. If you have a person who's hungry, sometimes we get very siloed around the area of ministry we have. Let's take a church context. You might be a department leader or a gathering leader in our church, and it's very easy to just get so focused on that one area and go, this is my department, and and we can become very driven, very hungry, but when we lack these other areas, particularly when we lack smarts, we end up bulldozing everybody else out of the way. It's just like we're on a mission to get our thing done, and we've got to be aware of that and make sure that we recognise that even though every one of us is a leader, we're part of something bigger. We're part of an organisation which is much bigger than us, and I'm a part of an organisation, our movement, which is much bigger, and so it's always about looking at it from that perspective. That's the bulldozer. The smart person who's just smart, they'll become the charmer, they'll sweet talk people, they'll get stuff done, but they're not really a team player. And so they're focusing on using their people smarts, if you like, for their own gain. And so these are the most destructive. If you really know people in your teams who are in one of these areas and really predominant in one of those areas and largely lacking the other two, for instance, then you've probably got some work to do. And as Darren said, EQ can be learned. So if you can have someone in your group who you're accountable to and you've got people who you're leading, you don't have to dismiss them. You don't go, okay, that person's a bulldozer, they're never going to be used ever again. Just being aware of that, and don't use the label. You don't go up to a person and say, hey, you're a bulldozer. Use conversations for the purpose of coaching. And before we close in 5 minutes, I'll explain some of that. Question from Elle. Would it be beneficial to ask a mentor, accountability person, which category you might fall into? Great question. Or would that hurt more than help? Really good question, Elle. I would say to that, it would only hurt if you're not willing to hear what the person has to say. If you're open to what the person has to say, genuinely open to it, by all means ask them. And before we finish, I'm going to give you some tools where you can, a couple of ideas about how you can go about assessing where you might feel you're at in this, and then how you could maybe access that accountability from somebody else. So we'll come back to that question. I will say one thing. The person who lacks people smarts, this one in particular, they will have no idea that they lack people smarts. Let's face it, if you don't, you all know people who are completely incompetent when it comes to interacting with other people, and they're just like a bull in a china shop, and they upset people everywhere they go, and they're completely oblivious to it. And if you try and sit there and tell that person that they lack people smarts, they will be convinced they don't. So in all that's probably true in all these areas, and that's why that question from Elle is such a good question. Okay, so now when you have two of these categories stronger than the other, it also leads to three other categories. I haven't got much room to write them here, but he calls this category, when you get a mix of hunger and humble, he calls it the accidental mess maker. The accidental mess maker. So this is a person who has the best of intentions, works hard, but probably unaware, because they lack people smarts, that they're probably creating messes in their workplace, in their team, without even being aware that they're upsetting other people. So it's not that they're doing it maliciously, it's just that they're accidentally making some mess. The person who has a combination of humility and people smarts but lacks hunger he calls it the lovable slacker. Do we have any lovable slackers in the room? The lovable slacker. Easy to get along with, generally lovely people, but not highly motivated. So that will mean that when the pressure is on in a team, they'll struggle. And the last one, and he says is probably the most dangerous of all of them, the hungry and smart person that lacks the humility. And the reason it's the most dangerous is he actually says humility is the most important, which doesn't surprise me. He's a Christian, and obviously we believe that too. But he calls this one the skillful politician. I wonder if you know any people who fit in that category, the skillful politician. They have the people smarts, they're go-getters, they know how to use people, but oftentimes they use their charm for the wrong reasons, and so as a result of that, they lack the humility, and so you end up with this mess, a person who looks like they're doing it. Darren says a bulldozing pawn. The accidental mess maker would be a bulldozing pawn. Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly what it would be like. So before we close tonight, I'm going to, and what I'll do is I'll upload it to Trained Up, and I'll send you a link so you guys can all get on and have a look at the course in the Trained Up module. But how do you assess yourself? So as we close with Elle's question, how would you assess yourself in regard to these things? And she said, would it be okay to ask your accountability person what they thought? And yes, that would be okay. That's one way you could do it. If you're comfortable enough with your leader to say, speak to me straight, tell me what I think, and make sure you give them permission, because most leaders are hesitant to say stuff. Even Pastor Phil says he's very hesitant to tell people what he really thinks because he doesn't want to create mess, he doesn't want to upset them. But if you're the kind of leader that will say, tell it to me straight, what can I do to grow, what can I do to improve, then that will be music to your leader's ears. And same when you're leading people that you lead in your sphere of influence as well. If you're a leader, you want people who you can work with, who are malleable, who want to grow. So by all means, ask them. But he actually says one of the best and most effective ways he's talking in the context of employees here, but for people to assess themselves is for them to evaluate themselves. He says there is one way to do that though, and it's to actually sit down and not just think about yourself, but ask the question slightly differently. He says, say, my teammates, my other people in my world would say such and such about me. So you're not just assessing what you would say about yourself, you're actually thinking now, what would other people say about me? How would they view me if I was to ask them? And so he says, he rates the survey, and I'm not going to go through all the results now, all the questions now, there's too many, but I'll put it up for you. But he says things like, on the regards to humility, I'll just pull two out of each. He says, my teammates would say, I compliment or praise them without hesitation. Or my teammates would say, I easily admit to my mistakes. Under hungry, for instance, he says, my teammates would say, I do more than what is required in my own job. Or my teammates would say, I'm willing to contribute to and think about work outside of office hours. For people smarts, he says, two examples. He gives about 6 or 7 under each category. 2 examples he says is, my teammates would say, I generally understand what others are feeling during meetings and conversations. My teammates would say, I adjust my behaviour and style to fit the nature of the conversation or relationship that I am in. And so he gets you to evaluate those, score yourself and see how you go. That's one way you can do that, and I'll get you guys to do that in your leisure. And the other way, he says, which is a little bit less threatening, is actually, and you might want to do this with your teams, if you want to take some of this with the people you're leading, rather than get them to do a self-assessment, it can be a bit confronting, just maybe explain these 3, and then just, he says, ask team members to simply rank the 3 virtues for themselves, starting with the one they feel they demonstrate most clearly, followed by the second and then the third. This allows everyone to call out their relative weaknesses without having to admit the extent of that weakness. And it gives the leader and the employee a chance to begin development. So you might just want to take the easier approach and go, well, that's the one I lack. For me, I know I lack people smarts. I've had people tell me that. John Vincelli told me that. That was the thing I had to work on, was my emotional intelligence. And so I've been trying to work on that one. That's me personally being vulnerable with you. And so, you might identify some area that you want to work on. All right, questions as we close, and we'll be done. Chris Tabone says, do we have accountability leaders, or are they supposed to get them yourselves? Okay, so I would say in the context of your structure within the church, your first point of call would be the person that's over you in your role. So if you're a gathering leader, you could talk to Ivana and Terry, or Ivana and Edwina in that context. If you're in a department, functioning in a department role, you would talk to your department leader's role, especially if that's something like the worship team, which is more heavily focused around team stuff than some of the other teams are. Some teams allow for a bit more of a relational connection. Other teams are more focused on function, and so those teams aren't always as conducive to this style of level of accountability. But the other way to do that is, it's okay to say to somebody in your world who you trust, or ask me if you want, say, hey, look, I really want to grow in some areas. Could I be accountable? And I may or may not be able to do that. I couldn't possibly do it with the 25 people who are on board that are online now, even if I wanted to, 26 people. But we can make sure. My goal is to help you make sure you've got people in your world who are leading you well, who you are in a good relationship with, and feel as though you can grow. And that's something even in our movement. Pastor Steve, our overseer, that's one of his roles in the national office, is to help facilitate these accountability oversight relationships between pastors and oversight within the movement. And sometimes it works well and sometimes it doesn't, and they have to adjust it because they're not clicking with someone, and so they go to a different kind of pastor or leader. But our goal is to help everyone who wants to have accountability, have accountability. Hey, we're over time, so I'm gonna let you guys go. But if you want to stay online, I'll stay online for a couple more minutes and answer any questions that you might want to type into the box, and then we'll close. But other than that, if you want to go, you need to head off. Feel free to do so. I'll hang around for another 5 minutes or so. Otherwise, thanks, guys. Looking forward to Sunday. I'm going to be preaching a short devotion on Jesus healing the Gadarene demoniac, and we're going to pray for some people and believe people can get set free in some areas of their life. So that's going to be great. I'll see you guys on Sunday. Have a great week. Beck and Jill, bye to all. And so I'll be here. Feel free to sign off if you need to. Feel free to ask questions if you want to. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time.